So, Whitney, since I know you specialize with pre and postnatal women, can we just, I guess, start there and just like if you want to talk about, what are some of the most common things that you're seeing with, let's start with pregnancy first, right? I think we don't talk about pelvic floor enough with pregnancy. It's a lot of, you know, don't ask, don't tell kind of conversations with doctors and their, pregnant client or pregnant patients. And women don't realize, I think there's such a misconception out there too, right? From like vaginal births versus cesarean births. And a lot of women that think, oh, well, I'm not having a vaginal birth, so my pelvic floor is going to be just fine.
Right. Yes, that is a very common misconception.
Yeah. Do you want to start there and talk about just what your pelvic floor goes through, I guess, during pregnancy, and we can kind of go from there?
Yeah, yeah. So pelvic floor is significantly involved during pregnancy, even though a lot of times people don't think about it. Almost all of my moms that I see postpartum, they're all just like, oh, I wish I had known about this while I was pregnant, because there are so many things that we can do during pregnancy for prevention. So, one of the big things is our pelvis becomes more inherently unstable throughout pregnancy, which we need it to get a baby out. And so that's okay. That's natural. Our ligaments become more lax. And so some of the other muscles kind of have to take up the slack, but we want everything to come in evenly. So we don't want one group of muscles to take up all the slack. And if for some people it's their pelvic floor that ends up doing all the work. And so these women might have symptoms like painful intercourse while they're pregnant. That can be new during pregnancy. Painful intercourse is never normal. But it's again one of those things where people are just like, oh, yep, well, I'm pregnant, so my body's changing, and that's just what happens. So painful intercourse is a big kind of red flag that there's probably something going on with your pelvic floor that's not normal that we would want to address while you're pregnant. Um, Urinary urgency and frequency. Now, of course, there is a change in urination during pregnancy, so partly from the hormones, also from pressure from the baby, but there can be a point where it's too urgent or too frequent, where
Okay, so
moms are going,
Whitney, what's your definition of too frequent, right? Because we hear this all the time, especially as pregnancy progresses. And there's, sometimes it's just like that bladder does not have a lot of space.
yes. Yes. So ideally, I want moms to be able to go once every 3 to 4 hours. During pregnancy, I'm okay with once every 2 hours.
Okay.
But much more frequent than that, that's too much. And so sometimes then we start to train our bladder in either incomplete emptying, so it's just not fully emptying, and so then you have to go more often. Some people are just going with the very first urge that they get, which that's just a warning urge. We're not supposed to go the very first urge that we get. Some people are just in case peeing. We call it jicking.
You call it what?
Jicking.
Oh, just in case, Pete. I have not heard that, but I do know that I get that, especially from my mom's before exercise, right?
Yeah.
Typically
Yep.
more on the postpartum conversation. I know we'll talk about that, but you're seeing that with pregnant moms as well. And like you said, can you talk about this a little bit more? Because this is something we haven't really addressed too much. Is where like what can be the negative effect, right? If you're just peeing to pee because you're like, oh gosh, well, I want to go now before I get busy with whatever. But is that actually training, whether it's your brain and or your bladder, to then like feel like it has to go with that initial urge, and that's actually not a good thing?
Exactly. Yep. So our bladder, as it fills, it's supposed to fill to a certain amount. And that's when we'll get the first urge. That's like a little warning, like, oh, you're going to need to go soon. You don't need to go right now, though. It's not urgent. And then it's supposed to fill some more until you get to a certain level of like a certain capacity where that's going to be like, okay, you need to go. And so it still shouldn't be to the point where it's urgent, like run to the bathroom because you need to pee so bad. But let's say that capacity is at like 3/4 full, just as an example. Now, if you are jicking and you just go because you're just like, oh, I need to go run an errand or whatever, you're just in case peeing, you might be going and it's only like 1/4 full. And so if you keep emptying at 1/4 full, that's going to start to retrain your brain to be like, oh, well, she keeps going every time that she's like 1/4 full. So I'm going to start telling her that she needs to go at 1/4 full or even before 1/4 full. So we can retrain the bladder to then not have as much of a capacity because we're getting that urge signal earlier and earlier.
Yeah. So it really is a brain thing. I love that we're bringing
Yep.
this up because as more and more I work with more and more women and get deeper in everything that I'm doing, I'm like, so much of it really is about the brain and rewiring it to these habits that we want. And so first we have to be aware that we're even doing it. So what if a woman has been doing that? She's like, okay, definitely doing that. So how do we get her out of that? Does she just start to slowly like, okay, at that initial urge, like have her wait, say like, could you wait another 15 minutes and then go
Yep.
like, do baby steps like that?
Yeah, so I typically leave it kind of depending on how urgent it is. So for some people, they just didn't know that they shouldn't go on that first urge. And they're just like, oh, well, if I have to, I can hold it. And so for some people, it's easy as, okay, well, look at what time you went pee, wait 2 hours. So just make
Okay.
sure it's been 2 hours and then you can go again. So for some people, it's as easy as that. For others, though, their urge ends up getting pretty significant. And so let's say that they're peeing once every hour. For them, we might have to say, okay, look at what time you peed. I want you to wait an hour and 15 minutes. And so you're going to do this interval training. And once you get to an hour and 15 minutes and that feels fine, you don't have a lot of urgency within that time frame. Now we're going to push it to an hour and 30 minutes. Now we're going to push it an hour 45. Now we're going to do 2 hours. So for some people, we need to do those baby steps. For others, it's purely just, oh, I didn't know that I shouldn't go that often. I just do it because it's easy, it's convenient. A lot of people are at home, and so the bathroom is readily available. And so for some people, it's just a matter of they didn't know that they should wait longer. And so for them, it's easy. They just have
Yeah.
to look at the clock and just wait.
Awesome. No, this is great. So while we're talking about bladder for a minute, can we talk about the importance of relaxing and making sure that the bladder is fully emptying? Because I know, right, so many moms, we both work with moms and everyone's in a hurry all the
Yeah.
time. And it's like, oh gosh, okay, I'm going to go pee, but and maybe it is not emptying the bladder all the way, which can then lead to other things, which you can talk about what that can cause. So
Yeah, so we want to take our time both for peeing and pooping. So it should be the organs that are doing the work and our pelvic floor should be relaxing. So I always like to use the tube of toothpaste visual. So if you think of the trunk like a tube of toothpaste and the pelvic floor is the cap. When we cough, laugh, sneeze, run, jump, we need to make sure that cap's on tight so the toothpaste doesn't come out. But when we need to pee, we need to poop, or we're having a baby, we want that cap off so that there's as little resistance to the toothpaste coming out as possible. Now, our bladder is a muscle. It's not really a muscle under our control. I mean, to a certain extent, it's kind of under our control with how we use our pelvic floor, but it's a smooth muscle. So when it starts to contract, we want a nice full contraction of that bladder to push the urine out. And we want the pelvic floor nice and relaxed while we do that. But we also don't want to push to pee. So that's another thing. Moms are terrible because we're in a hurry. And so you have like a crying baby. And you're just like, oh my gosh, go, 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 go. And so moms are pushing to pee, they're
Mm.
pushing to poop. And so that can start to weaken the pelvic floor. It also increases that downward pressure on all the organs, which could eventually, especially with enough repetition, lead to pelvic organ prolapse. So especially with the bladder, it's called cystocele. The bladder starts to descend and it can literally fall out of the vagina. So we don't want that to happen.
No, we
We
do
want
not.
want to sit, we want to stay calm, do some deep breathing. So getting a little bit of intra-abdominal pressure just from diaphragmatic breathing, using our diaphragm to move down on the inhale, that can help our pelvic floor relax. So that's how we want to pee. It's the same thing for pooping too. One of the big things though, of course, there's the squatty potty.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you like that?
So one of my colleagues and I, oh my gosh, years ago, we were just, when the squatty potty came out and started to become really well known, we've been telling our patients for years and years and years, oh, just put like a little stool, grab a couple Amazon boxes, put some books, just put something under your feet so that your knees are above your hips. So that angle of the pelvis really helps. And then here comes the squatty potty, and we're just like,
you're like, why didn't I come up with that?
I didn't invent this.
I know. You'd be retired by now.
Yes. Retired, traveling the world. Something that simple. So the squatty potty is actually great.
Or you can just use a step stool or some boxes.
Yep. You can use whatever you want. But that helps to get the pelvis in a little better position. It helps with the angle of the rectum and the anus. It helps with relaxing the pelvic floor. So our body's natural position, especially for pooping, is the squat position. We don't squat to go to the bathroom. So getting into that position with the knees elevated, we're mimicking that squat position. What's also really important is we're not hovering over the toilet. Don't hover. We need to sit and relax. So that's another problem too. If people are hovering over the toilet, they're not actually sitting. Just think about what your muscles are doing when you're hovering. All of
you're
your
going to be
muscles
contracting everything in pelvic floor, and it's just going to be much more stressful. No, I love that we're talking about this because I think it's, pelvic organ prolapse conversation comes up a lot. And I think that, like you and I have talked about this, but it's been a long time. When I last saw you in Chicago, which was, I don't even remember what that was. That was a long time ago. But anyway, and the whole conversation about pelvic organ prolapse is, I always bring it up in my programs and we talk about it. It comes up often in different episodes. And, so many women I have learned that don't even know what it is, or that it can even happen to them until it happens. And fortunately, it was something I learned about at, my early 20s, so that I didn't have to deal with that, through having 3 pregnancies. But I didn't know what it was. And, and even in my background that I have, it's so amazing. Like we don't learn these things, even when I was in exercise science and all my prenatal training I did prior to me going outside of the box and learning and compiling stuff together. We don't talk enough about this. Right. And so I think getting women to understand, like, there are things that you can do to prevent so much until, cause it's so much easier to prevent than it is to heal, but we can heal, which is awesome.
Yep.
So I'll talk about that.
But prevention is key.
Yeah.
The 3 big things for prevention for prolapse, which everyone should start even before having babies. We should all be taught this in like high school health class.
Right.
Our posture. So if you think about that tube of toothpaste, if we're constantly slouched, that toothpaste is being curled and you get this constant downward pressure on the pelvic floor. And so posture is huge. If you have this constant pressure downward, your organs are going to have more of the opportunity to descend. Our body mechanics, so just proper lifting mechanics, just lifting, We should be engaging our pelvic floor and our deep core muscles. And ideally, we don't have to think about this. For most people, it should happen automatically. But especially during pregnancy and postpartum, most people need to retrain this. These muscles have been so stretched, a lot of them don't really know how to work again. And so we have to train some of these things that happened automatically. So, body mechanics with that quick little squeeze before you lift, push, pull, any type of exertion. Because again, that's squeezing around that tube of toothpaste. If that cap's not on tight, the toothpaste gets pushed down and out. And toileting, so no pushing to pee or poop. Those three things can prevent a lot of issues, especially with prolapse.
Yeah. So, okay, here's a big one that comes up because we talk about digestion a lot and gut health, right? So many women are constipated and men, but women, and especially, okay, so during pregnancy, right, digestion slows down. So the likelihood of constipation actually increases during pregnancy, and then postpartum, right, trying to get everything back, everything's kind of shifted and moved. Do you have any initial tips that they're probably similar to what I share, but I'd love to hear your perspective, that you share with your pre and postnatal clients from a digestion perspective, because keeping that stool soft obviously helps a lot.
Yeah, and it's so important. The three pillars of bowel health: water intake is huge. So important. And so many people, it's interesting how many people I see that are just like, oh yeah, I'm drinking lots of water. I'm just like, okay, how much are you drinking? They're just like 40 ounces a day. And I was just like, oh, that's not enough. that would be enough if you were 80 pounds. So the general rule of thumb is about half your body weight in ounces is about how much we want to aim for during the day. And it doesn't count if you chug it all at once. So we want to drink it consistently throughout the day. We want that constant hydration through our systems. And so a lot of people end up playing catch up, like at dinner time and before bed, where they're just like, oh, I didn't meet my water intake today. Okay, I'm going to have like 30 ounces. And our bodies aren't meant to be able to absorb that much. So it literally just goes right through you. You're not going to be able to use it.
Yeah, absorption is huge. Do you recommend, I know you're going to share your other two, but do you recommend electrolytes? Do you find that adding some electrolytes really helps with hydration?
Some people do, and some people are just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't really hurt anything. So I kind of leave it up to them. And of course, during pregnancy, I always say, get everything cleared by your OB or midwife, everything that you're taking, just so they know what your
right, of course.
Is.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had seen a difference or not with women who did versus those that didn't, or anything. So
yeah. I also do find, especially during pregnancy, the type of iron supplements, if some women are on iron can be pretty constipating. And so looking for some brands that have less constipation. I know when I was pregnant, my acupuncturist really recommended a certain brand where it was liquid iron. And she's just like, this isn't going to back you up. This is the one I want you to take.
Yeah, that's super important. And also combining iron with some extra vitamin C, because, and like I said, of course, run by your doctor, but a vitamin C can help the bioabsorption basically of iron. And I think we don't talk enough about matching nutrients together. It's always, oh, take this or this, right? But that also then can help and ascorbic acid. I like that. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. And I love, like, we have some great naturopaths here. So a lot of times the like general medical community they don't get too much into diet and lifestyle and that kind of stuff. So I typically recommend trying to work with a holistic or functional medicine doctor, because they really aim for optimal. A lot of our midwives here do a really good job with that. Because there are also some vitamins you shouldn't be taking with others. And
Yeah, that's true.
so
Yeah.
for the same reasons,
Yeah.
they change the absorption. So it's good to be working with someone who's knowledgeable about that, so you can get into a little routine throughout the day.
Yeah. Love that. Okay. Sorry. I totally derailed you. What was number two?
Okay. Number two is fiber intake. So typically we want to be in the 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. Um, you don't want to be too high in fiber, because then you can have more issues with like gas, and some people will actually end up being more constipated if they have too much fiber. So we want to find that sweet spot with fiber intake. And then movement. Movement is the third big pillar for bowel health. We need to be moving. Now, of course, that's not easy in those first 6 weeks postpartum when we really shouldn't be that active. But even just simple little things in bed that you could be doing, little heel pumps, little heel slides, ankle pumps, that kind of stuff. You can do that stuff in bed just fine. So water, fiber, and then the movement, those are the three pillars to bowel health.
Love that.
The other thing I like to recommend for people, if they are constipated, try to get on like a routine throughout your day. Most of us, we poop at the same time every day. It's like either you're a morning pooper, my kids are dinner time poopers. A lot of times it revolves around food. So for people who struggle with constipation, eating a good breakfast, like a substantial breakfast that helps to get some of the bowel, like the peristalsis and things, gets things moving. A warm drink, doesn't have to be coffee. I know a lot of people, they get things moving with coffee, but even just like a warm glass of water or tea. And then the ILU massage, which is a little massage you can do on your belly that makes an I and an L and a U. I have a little video of it actually on my Instagram.
Okay. You have to send it to me.
I have a video of me doing it on my kids. But that's a good one to get the bowel stimulated as well.
Yeah. I love stomach massage. I teach one too. That is so helpful. I think it's super helpful postpartum, right? When you're just trying to kind of get everything moving back into place and things all kind of feel out of order. So I love those tips. Okay. So let's kind of circle back and talk specifically about pelvic floor with pregnancy. I love the whole bladder and bowel movements because that's so important, right? Because that's a prevention perspective, or if someone is dealing with incontinence or does have some pelvic organ prolapsing, they can work to improve that to help in preventing it from getting worse and hopefully doing some healing along the way as well.
Yep. So pelvic floor during pregnancy, one of the things, so let's talk about some of the different conditions that can happen during pregnancy regarding pelvic floor.
Okay, let's do it.
Painful sex is one of the biggest ones. That's actually like my favorite thing to treat. Typically, it's just because those muscles have gotten too tight. And so just like how you had mentioned earlier about how we need to retrain our brain, we typically aren't thinking about our pelvic floor. Most people don't have great awareness down here. Most people have tried a Kegel because everyone's been told to do them, and they're just like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. And so awareness is key. Painful sex, especially when it starts during pregnancy, typically is just because those muscles have gotten too tight, and we need to retrain them down to a much more normal resting tone. So typically it requires some manual work. So as a pelvic floor PT, we go vaginally and we press on each of the muscles, just like you would a knot in your shoulder or your back. We find those little knots. So those knots can happen in the pelvic floor. And so we find those little knots, we press and hold. And so we get those muscles to start to relax. So it's all just trigger point release. With that, we tend towards getting into these holding postures and that holding tension in our pelvic floor. And so when that happens, we're not even aware that we're constantly tensing. So for a lot of people, they tense their jaws or their shoulders, especially with stress. We're very used to that.
Yeah.
A lot of people tense their pelvic floor without even being aware that they're doing it. So after we get those muscles down to a more normal resting tone, I'm having these moms check in constantly throughout the day. So you get that mind body awareness. Typically, people will notice once we get it down, they'll notice, oh, wow, everything feels so much more relaxed or softer or lighter. And so then I just say, take a mental picture of what this feels like, because your brain is so used to you being tight that it's going to tighten you back up. That's muscle memory. And we need to train it that we don't want it to do that anymore. So I'll have them set an alarm on their phone to go off like every hour, every 2 hours in the beginning, so that they're checking in, they're noticing, okay, where's my pelvic floor right now? Can I relax? Can I let it go? So the letting go is typically, I do visuals like dropping a marble. So imagine a marble in the vagina. Imagine you're dropping that marble down and out. You can imagine your sit bones spreading apart. So that can be a nice one. A big one for birth is imagine a flower blooming. So that can be another one. So doing some of the imagery to relax the muscles, that can be really helpful to then do throughout the day. And it gets very frustrating if you're someone who constantly tenses, because every time you check in, you're just like, oh man, I'm tight again. Okay, drop that marble. But eventually with repetition, we're going to retrain it down to a normal resting tone. And so that's going to help with things like painful sex. It can help with some of the pelvic girdle dysfunctions, pubic symphysis dysfunction, some of those types of things, because we need balance is what we need. Everything in our pelvis needs balance. If we're constantly tensing, it's going to affect everything around our pelvis. And so we also, if we're in the constant state of tension, we're also not going to be able to get as good of a Kegel or pelvic floor muscle contraction when we need it.
So Whitney, I have some questions with this. Just from my observations and conversations that we have is, do you see that a majority of women that you work with, their pelvic floor is actually too restricted? She's too tight?
I'd say in a lot of my moms with dysfunction, yes.
Because I feel like the conversation goes, oh, well, the pelvic floor, like, you know, like, oh, your pelvic floor is too weak. Because I'll get women that reach out to me and they're like, oh, well, my pelvic floor is too tight. Do you help women whose pelvic floor is too tight? And I'm like, yes, because we work so much on expanding and releasing and readjusting posture and pelvic positioning and all of that. So I just was curious that I assume that you're seeing a lot of that for, with, you said, women that have dysfunction. Next piece on this is, do you tend to see that women that are too tight and too restricted, that she tends to have more of a posterior tuck in her pelvis? Because she's like, is she also then gripping her glutes, which then causes all that restriction and tightness through the pelvic floor? Because we have so many women that are, we talk about glute gripping all the time. I'm like, release the glutes. We've got to get the balance. So I'm assuming that, like you're seeing, but I'd like to hear your perspective and your take that, are you seeing that kind of that same thing from a postural perspective? Because we know obviously with pregnancy, our posture, we tend to get that posterior tuck of the pelvis with pregnancy, unless women are really aware of it.
Right. Yeah. And that is one of the big things that we do see. The pelvic floor. So some people will pretty much be isolated at pelvic floor being super tight and gripping. But a lot of times we will see the glutes. Sometimes we'll see the abs.
Oh, I see them both. A lot of times I feel like they come hand in hand. If we've got someone who's tight in their glutes, they're really likely tight in their obliques as well, because they've been taught to squeeze and grip, and like, that's how they've been taught to work out. And, and it's like, again, it's a brain thing.
That's what they've been taught to do during their whole day. Like, suck it in, it in, keep it in. And so they're constantly squeezing.
Always squeezing. Oh my gosh. Stop squeezing.
Especially during pregnancy, just let that belly go.
Yeah. Oh yes. Love the belly release work. It's so important to do. Um, okay. Anything else you wanted to like that you see a lot of, or, that you see during pregnancy, or should we talk about postpartum?
I guess the other thing during pregnancy would be incontinence.
Mm-hmm.
So, incontinence, a lot of times we're thinking weakness, but quite often we'll see tightness that is leading to the weakness. So, most often we need to find the balance first. We need to release the muscles, get them to a nice normal resting tone, and then retrain that nice contraction of the muscles and being able to use it when we need it. So, some people will have plenty of strength, but they're just not using their muscles. So
Like they don't know how to activate it correctly.
Yeah.
Or a balance, right? Since we have, when someone activates her pelvic floor, right? She's not always necessarily activating it balanced throughout the pelvic floor. It's that she could be overactivating on one side, underactivating on the other, or front to back could be imbalanced, correct?
Yep. So we can have some of those issues with some of the balance, but sometimes too, people just they don't engage when they need to. And so it's that whole tube of toothpaste thing. So now they sneeze, there's that squeeze around the tube of toothpaste, but the cap didn't come on. And so the cap's not on, they didn't activate their pelvic floor. And so the toothpaste comes out. And so I see some people where it's just a matter of, okay, now because your body's in a different position, it's not used to being here, you have to think about doing that quick little squeeze before you sneeze or before you lift, push, pull to retrain it to come in automatically.
Okay, I get what you're saying. So it's not that she doesn't have the ability or is too weak or imbalanced. She just hasn't trained her pelvic floor that, oh, I need to actually lightly activate to support before I sneeze or before I cough or before I go for a run or like all of those things. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of the things is just the coordination, making sure you're using it when you need it. Some people will have just straight up weakness. And so we need to be strengthening the pelvic floor. It's a little tricky during pregnancy because, I mean, with muscle changes, it typically takes like 8 to 12 weeks of regular, consistent exercise before we're noticing improvements in strength and tone and endurance. And so add that just muscle physiology to a constantly changing body where you're just having more and more downward pressure and more pelvic mobility or instability. It can make it kind of tricky to really get rid of incontinence during pregnancy. It's still something we'd like to try to do. But it's one of those things, if I'm seeing a mom and she's like 34 weeks pregnant, I'm just like, all right, we probably won't be changing your incontinence at this point. Really try to squeeze what you've got when you feel that sneeze coming. But then we'll really address all of this postpartum so that it doesn't.
Right. But you're getting her started. And Whitney, so like what I find during pregnancy is that I always say pregnancy is the best time for a woman to learn how to effectively strengthen her pelvic floor and deep core because she has tactile feedback of her baby. Do you see the same that when you get, even if you get a mom that comes in at 34 weeks or 36 weeks, even, right? Even if you've not worked with her a lot, but just that little bit of work during pregnancy, do you see things start to wake up and connect quicker postpartum versus a mom who doesn't do any of this during pregnancy and then you work with her postpartum, even at the same stage postpartum? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So in general, I'd say yes. So someone who has who's just more in tune with their body and getting that awareness throughout pregnancy, it's typically easier for them postpartum. Now, some of it is all out the window depending on the type of birth, right?
Okay.
So someone who might have a more traumatic birth, someone who might have had a 3rd or 4th degree tear, they may have done everything right during pregnancy and just the circumstances of birth didn't allow for an intact perineum. And so they might have a little more challenging time than someone else postpartum, like just
that makes sense. Correct. Okay. Yeah.
The other thing during pregnancy, I'd say that I wish all moms took a little more seriously would be the perineal massage. Um, I know that the research is mixed
Mhm.
for like the effectiveness, but really, if you're going to be stretching those muscles, getting that flexibility and everything, it's going to help, even if it's just a little bit. It will help. You're getting more. It's so my analogy is always, okay, think about the first time you ever did yoga and you do that forward bend, you can barely touch your toes, everything in your hamstrings feel really tight. If someone came up behind you and pushed you down to touch the floor, you're probably going to strain your hamstrings. So that's a little tear. So you might tear your hamstrings because there is no flexibility.
Mhm.
But if you're doing yoga regularly, you're getting that stretch. Let's say you're doing it like 3, 4 times a week, you've been doing it for a few weeks, you're going to be able to reach closer and closer to your toes. If someone does the same thing and they push you down to touch the floor, you're going to feel a big stretch at those hamstrings, but now they have more flexibility and give that they're less likely to tear. And so that's kind of how I interpret or how I explain the reasoning behind doing it. Because as babies coming out, we just want as much flexibility to those muscles and that tissue as possible. So and then if you don't tear, it's going to be a lot easier
Yes, it
afterward.
is. Absolutely. Yes, I've experienced extremes. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in the perineal prep work. And the thing is, you've got to do it consistently. You really do have to be dedicated to doing it. If you do it a couple of times, that's not going to do anything. So I normally have people start around that 34 to 36 week range and then aim for every day to every other day. And you should be able to get much more flexibility. And that's also a good time to practice then that coordination of looming the flowers, spreading the sit bones, dropping the marble, getting that relaxation of the pelvic floor, and doing that during birth, especially during that pushing stage.
Mm-hmm.
That can be another way that we can decrease the chances of tearing.
Yeah. No, it's really important. And I was going to ask specifically from pushing, once baby is crowning, what are your thoughts on having, whether it's midwife or doctor, right, that's adding an actual added lubrication? Do you see that is beneficial as well? So there just isn't quite as much friction with the head to help in minimizing tearing.
Yeah, so that is helpful as long as they're not too aggressive.
Okay,
so
that makes sense. Yeah.
For the most part, like adding that and just doing nice, more gentle or maybe prolonged holds on the tissue and maybe some counter pressure, like that is helpful. But man, I've had some moms and where I've talked with like their doulas after, and the doulas just like the OB literally ripped them by doing it because they did it so aggressively that they maybe wouldn't have torn. And so as long as it's not too aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really more just having, like you said, a little bit of counter pressure. Like, I think we think like, I don't know, the body's so amazing that it doesn't take a lot to be like, to have that added benefits for it. And then I think the other thing too with birth is, cause I get moms that are like, oh, I birthed my child in like 3 pushes. And I think that was me with like, mine were fast too, but always encouraging moms, like, that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is not to push baby out as quickly as possible. Because we want to allow that perineum some time to open up and stretch, and providing everything's going fine, baby's healthy, heart rate, everything, then actually allowing those contractions to open up more slowly. And, I know for some women, it happens a lot faster, but there's like kind of that middle ground. Like we don't want women pushing for hours and hours, because that's why, we can teach women how to more effectively push and train their muscles and open up and all that. But we also don't want them pushing out super fast if they don't have to.
Exactly.
It's like this balance, this finesse.
When someone tells me, oh yeah, I pushed for 10 minutes, I'm just like, all right, I'm in my head, I'm assuming they had perineal tearing.
Yeah.
Because it's not enough time to get that prolonged gentle stretch to the muscles and the perineal tissue. So for me, I like it when someone's pushing between 1 to 2 hours.
Oh, you really like them going that long?
It's a typically, most people when they're in that range, they typically have a more intact perineum.
Okay. Yeah, we're seeing, I don't know, the last couple of years, we've seen women with less tearing, by having her do so much of the release work, even through like the pelvis so far ahead of time. And we have a lot of women, but I would say in that more 30-minute mark with minimal to no tearing, even with first babies. So I don't know. It's interesting that
the thing is that most people aren't taking that time to do the prep work.
That's very true. Yeah. The prep work
then you can go, you should be able to go a little quicker. But quite honestly, most people aren't doing the prep work.
Yeah.
The majority are not. And so in that instance, typically like an hour is decent. Of course, there are so many other contributing factors.
No, it's good. I love hearing your perspective on it because, we can never learn too much. And I love it. I think that this whole conversation about birth is so important with pelvic floor function because it's when a lot of women's issues start. But she doesn't know what to do about it or didn't even know there was anything she could do to prepare for it or what she can even do in those early weeks postpartum. So can we talk about cesarean for a minute? Because I want to make sure I want your perspective on this because I want to make sure we definitely have to mention cesarean because it's such a big myth that women are like, oh, well, I can't tell you how many times I've heard it. I'm sure you've heard it so many times. Oh, well, I don't need to practice to push prep or I don't need to do all this release work because I'm having a cesarean. And I'm like, oh, no.
Yeah, no, we still need to do the work for so many reasons. One, during pregnancy, to have an optimal, healthy, like pain-free pregnancy, we need our pelvic floor in as optimal of a position and length and all of the balance that we've talked about, regardless of if you're going to have a C-section or not. So whether your pelvic floor is too tight or it's just really weak, it can lead to more discomforts and issues during pregnancy. We also want to then, like we've already talked about, we want to prep for our postpartum recovery.
Yeah.
And the number of times too, where I've heard moms that they're just like, oh, well, I'm going to have a C-section. My OB says that it'll save my pelvic floor. It doesn't save your pelvic floor. So for so many reasons, the changes start for a lot of people during pregnancy, which has nothing to do with birth.
Yep.
2, a C-section is a major abdominal surgery. And so the number of times that I've seen moms postpartum after C-sections that are just like, well, I don't know why I have painful sex and I pee my pants. My baby didn't come out that way. And it's a major trauma. A surgery is a trauma to the body, and everyone's bodies interpret traumas in different ways. And for some people, that trauma to the abdomen, they'll end up tensing all around the pelvis afterwards, including the pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor goes into this protective squeeze, the glutes, sometimes the adductors, so inner thighs, the muscles around the pelvis just guard and protect. And so then it stays that way if we're not aware that that's happening, and then penetration can be painful.
I'm glad you mentioned all that about it being a trauma. I mean, birth technically can be as well. Even if it goes well, it's just a big shift and change in the body and all the hormones and everything that come after it. And with cesareans too, they usually put women on antibiotics just as a precautionary. And then that's like one more unnecessary sometimes, unless of course it's an emergency cesarean, right? There's always those outliers, which is why we have cesareans. But then when women go on antibiotics, then it's like one more round of antibiotics that if you could prevent that, right? Just from a gut perspective, for mom and for baby. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about postpartum. What are some of the common things that you see? Okay. There's one big question I want to make sure we really talk about, because I feel like you and I talked about it a long time ago, and I'm always trying to reiterate it to my moms, is about running during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about that before, like our transition from pregnancy to postpartum? Is what do you see with moms that are running during pregnancy? What is your markers and guidelines for when she can, or maybe you're like, absolutely not? I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
So I'm not a huge fan of running, especially towards the end of pregnancy, for so many reasons. Mainly our bodies just aren't what they were pre-pregnancy. And so this is where it gets like so hard for my runners, because they want those endorphins, they want that release, and they get it through running. That first trimester, go for it. I mean, a lot of us are feeling so crappy during that first trimester that we might not be doing much for exercise in general. But if you're feeling up for it, go for it. The big thing is you have to listen to your body. So any of the 3 P's, if you pee your pants, you have pain, or you feel pelvic pressure, you have to stop. You need to listen to your body. That's your body telling you something's not right. It doesn't mean you can never do it again. We just need to modify, really work on that foundation, and then start to challenge it again. Now, into second trimester, if it's someone who hasn't really been a runner, don't start. There's no point. Just wait until afterwards if you really want to run. But otherwise, do other things. Do things that are low impact. You can be on a bike. You can do elliptical. You can do swimming. We have other options. Running is so jarring to the pelvis, and our pelvis is already inherently unstable from the ligament laxity, that we can lead to more injuries because of that impact. So I personally am not a huge fan of running. I've also seen like some really bad things, just mainly prolapse being a big one that I see.
I was gonna say, I know you've shared some of those stories with me in the past, but yeah. And that's where it's about trying to get her to understand prevention too. Yeah. And like, is it really worth keep doing it for this period of time if you take, 6 months off during pregnancy, and then, okay, so what's your guideline for her getting back into running postpartum? How long-ish? And I know there's, variations, but what's kind of your minimum guideline? Like, you really need to hit this marker in order to get back to running.
I want the pelvic floor to be solid. So as kind of a catch-all for most moms in the pelvic PT world, a lot of times we're thinking like, ideally wait for those 4 to 6 months, that 4 to 6 month range. Now, and so if you think about it, those 6 weeks postpartum that you're supposed to be recovering and not doing like all that much for challenging exercise, wait until you've got that all clear from your OB or midwife. Now let's say you're starting with gaining the foundation of your core. It's going to take those 2 to 3 months of regular exercise to get that solid core before you want to really stress it with impact. So that takes you out to 4 months. The other thing though, ideally everyone would see a pelvic PT postpartum.
Yes, that would be amazing if everybody can, but
in an ideal world.
in an ideal
Because there
world.
are some moms where at 6 weeks, they'll see me for their 6 week check. They see their OB or midwife, and then they come to me. And there are some where I check their pelvic floor and I'm just like, if you want to run today, you can, because your pelvic floor is strong. You've got endurance. Your tone is great. That transverse abdominis is coming in well. They've got all of the markers for me that they should be able to run pain-free without peeing their pants and with no pelvic pressure.
Yeah. But that's with having someone having checked them. And if you've got any of those symptoms, like I always tell women, I always encourage them to wait as close to 6 months as they can to just have more of a solid foundation. And that's of course, because I work with so many women that don't go see PTs, right? And they don't have that feedback. So we have to go off of more of symptoms and how are they connecting and doing all of that. So, is there any, and we're about to our time, is there any other things that you really highlight for your moms in those early postpartum weeks to work on or focus on, or
really focusing on that pelvic floor and getting that deeper core. The breathing, of course, starting with that and getting the foundation is huge, and taking the time to do that right, that sets up your whole foundation for the rest of your exercising life. Right? So we want to have that good foundation. If we don't start with that, then we're going to have typically issues with injuries, whether it's like pain injuries, prolapse, incontinence, that kind of stuff.
yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. I think that's kind of the biggest message. And one I'm always trying to tell everybody is like, you just have to slow down, take a break, like set your normal stuff that you want to do aside, know that the goal is to get you there. But in the meantime, really working to heal your body in the right way will set you up for just better health in general. So awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Posture and form is the other big thing.
Yeah.
You're going to be exercising, do it right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's going to be more effective that way.
Yep.
For sure. Whitney, will you just say like where people can find you, reach out to you, website, Instagram, and stuff like that, so I have it on our recording?
So my Instagram is at Restored Physique. Website is just restoredphysique.com. Also, Facebook is Restored Physique. What else? Those are the big ones. On my IGTV, I have some cool videos. One of like the perineal prep for during pregnancy and diastasis prevention during pregnancy.
Awesome.
So just some of the myofascial release there.
Yeah, I love that. It's so great. It's so awesome when we can get women to start with prevention, but also know that it is also never too late to work on healing the body, really, no matter what age someone is. I hear women, they'll reach out to me, they'll be like, yeah, well, I'm 40 now. And so it's not possible for me I've heard that once you're 40, I'm like, who makes this stuff up? You're like, Whitney, who makes the stuff up that's out there? I don't know.
It's funny because I primarily I really specialize in pregnancy and postpartum. But as I work with my moms, they tell their moms, the grandmas, and then the grandmas are calling me and they're just like, is it too late for me to fix these things? Now I've had it for 30 years. I'm just like, no, we can fix it. My oldest patient was 92. And
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're the same way with Core Rehab. We get a lot of moms that take it and they're like, oh, I got my mom enrolled and she's doing it too. And oh my God, it's just amazing what is possible for our body. That's why we got to have these conversations. And so awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Whitney.